Okay, here we go. Continuing on with the evolution part 2 video. I just kind of like this cartoon, so I put it in. And I want to try and I'm timing this so I can try and keep it to 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so now we're continuing on with other evidence for evolution. Okay, so in the lab we talked about comparative anatomy. And so this is when we look at, these are embryos here, and when you look at them, can you tell which one of them is a cow, which one might be, I don't know, a fish, which one might be a human, and which one might be a bird, or one of them might be a snake? I don't know. So in these, by just looking at these early embryological developmental stages, you can't tell which one is which. And so this is evidence that we evolved from a common ancestor because we see these shared developmental designs. So there you can see, revealing that you have the fish here, the chick, the pig, and man. So comparative embryology, okay, you compare the embryonic differences of different vertebrates. We're talking about vertebrates here. And this is evident that the more closely related forms continue to appear similar until later. So you can see that, the changes, we're obviously more closely related to a bird than we are to an amphibian. So we can see that we share developmental stages that are more similar to each other than since we're more closely related there, okay? Until you later on you start to see the differences. So more distant related forms show the differences much earlier. Okay, then there's homologous structures. Okay, so this is when we're looking at the more of the skeletal structures, and in this case, these are derived from the same basic body part or body design. And so when you think of the forelimb, okay, the forelimb of vertebrate organisms, okay, or if you think about the legs, the bone design goes one on top, two on the bottom, okay? So humerus, right, and then you have your ulna and your radius, okay? In the leg, it's the femur, one, and then the tibia, fibia down below. You look at the hands, you've got the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges, okay? So, same basic body part, even though modifications over time can happen because of different uses. So, if you look at the picture here, you see that, the same bone design, one on top, two on the bottom, even though they're used for different uses. So, not only in anatomy do we have embryological comparisons, but we compare skeletal structures as well. So, these are called homologous. Okay, remember, homo means the same, derived from the same body design. Now, opposed to that is analogous structures. Okay, so analogous structures are not derived from the same body design, even though they might be used for the same use. Okay, so the further apart organisms are on the evolutionary tree, you might see similar functions, but very different body designs. So, for example, okay, a butterfly and a bird are not very closely related, even though they both have wings for flight. These wings have bone and skin. These wings are made up of protein. Okay, here you have a gliding sugar baby, and it's a glider. It doesn't even fly, it just glides. Okay, so similar function, but they came from different body parts. So this is an example of what would some people call them a flying fish. Again, it's a glider, okay, a glider. Then we also have vestigial structures. Vestigial structures are remnants of a once useful structure, whether it's an organ or a bone. So these, again, are evidence that species have changed over time, okay? So here we can see that in a python, a snake, why does a python need a pelvis and a femur? Okay, or humans, why do we have a tailbone? Okay, it doesn't serve any purpose, but if you break it, it sure does hurt. Okay, if we look at other skeletal examples, the pelvis of a femur baleen whale. Okay, baleen whale. So here you've got the remnants there. but they don't have back appendages. Or a salamander, this is a cave salamander that lives in complete darkness, but it has vestigial eyes. They don't function, but in their evolutionary past, maybe when they weren't living in complete darkness, they needed those eyes. Now they don't. More vestigial structures. See that little bump in your ear? Okay, what's left of a once useful structure suggests that we evolved, that species can change over time. If you constructed a human from scratch, why give it a tailbone, okay, or an appendix? All right. Other evidence for evolution is something that we call coevolution. So look at this moth here. Remember, moths are only active at night, right? Okay. And then look at this as its feeding proboscis, okay, right there. And when they unwind it, okay, it's that long. That's crazy. Isn't that crazy? Well, why would it have this long feeding tube, and why would this orchid here, this orchid has the nectar is down a tube that's 12 inches long, okay? So, with coevolution, you're looking at the influence of closely associated species on each other in their evolution, okay? So they're closely related. We see this with pollinators or some predator and prey, okay, but mostly with pollinators. If I go forward a slide here, okay? So again, here is a bird that feeds on the nectar down here in this. So because it feeds on this, and because this is its feeder, pollinator, you can see how because of their their behaviors together, they independently evolved specific structures because of this close interaction with each other. The curved bill here, holding the pollen dusters up here and keeping the sweet nectar down here. This is an orchid, and it looks like the back end of a female wasp. So it's trying to trick out the male wasps to, hey, come and mate with me over here. So here's a male thinking that this is a female coming to mate with it. It's not getting the mating job done, but that flower sure is getting plenty of pollen dusted on that wasp to carry to another one. Okay, so another example here, I have video. Now this is
the common orchid has one of the strangest flowers in the world. Below the petals dangles a 12-inch long nectar tube, making it nearly impossible for any pollinator to reach the nectar at its base. But one manages to do so. On this island of mutants, a night-flying hawk moth craves orchids with plenty of nectar. Finding one, it unrolls an exceedingly long feeding proboscis.
That's crazy.
Exactly the same length as the nectar tube. It's no coincidence. It's an exclusive partnership where for the price of a sweet treat, the hawk moth takes pollen only to other comet orchids. On Madagascar, mutant tongues show the power of adaptation.
Okay. Alrighty.
For the ultimate in patio.
No. Sorry about that. Okay. Alright. Okay. So what was interesting about that hawk moth here is that when Darwin visited Madagascar, he never saw the moth and he never found the moth. But he did take copious notes on this orchid, and that orchids only open at night. So because the orchids only open at night, Darwin predicted that a moth would be its it would be its pollinator. And he also predicted and drew pictures of how this moth pollinator must have had a very long proboscis feeding tube. Even though he never saw it, he predicted it, and then it was several decades later that the moth was actually discovered. Specimens, that the moths were observed, and they were able to collect those specimens. Okay. Next we have convergent evolution. Convergent evolution is when you have two groups of unrelated species, okay, but they look the same. They have not like identical, but similar structures. So think about a shark, okay? A shark is a fish, cold-blooded, right? Has gills. And look at a dolphin, okay? A dolphin is a mammal and is warm-blooded, but yet they have similar body designs, okay? Why is that? Because they live in the same environment, the ocean, and they're going to exhibit similar environmental pressures. So therefore, even though they're unrelated, they evolved body characteristics that are similar to each other. Okay. More evidence for evolution now that we understand DNA and protein synthesis, transcription, translation, and that DNA is the universal genetic code for all living things on the planet. And the process of making proteins from the same alphabet of 20 amino acids. So what we can do is we can look at similarities in DNA and proteins, genes and gene products, because of this common genetic code. And what has been found is that, so for example, take hemoglobin, okay? Any animal that has blood. So birds have blood, all mammals have blood, all reptiles have blood, all amphibians have blood, right? So in those red blood cells, there's going to be the protein called hemoglobin, and its job is to latch onto the oxygen molecules that we intake, and it carries that oxygen to the tissues that it's needed and then drops it off, okay? So we can take that protein that's found in all red blood cells of any organism that has blood, and we can go to the polypeptide chain of the protein, the amino acids that make up that protein. Then we can look up the mRNA codons that code for those amino acids, and then we can do complementary base pairing from RNA back to DNA to figure out what the gene code is. And what has been consistent for all proteins that are common among organisms is that the further you are on the evolutionary tree, the more differences there are in your protein makeup for those proteins like hemoglobin, okay? But the more closer related you are, the fewer those differences are, okay? So for example, this tells us here we have the number of amino acids that differ from human hemoglobin, okay? The total chain length of the amino acids for hemoglobin is 146. So between a human and a frog, which is an amphibian, okay, there are 67 amino acid differences in that total of 146. So, but then when you compare that to a mouse, there's only 27. So that tells us that we are more closely related to a mouse than we are to a frog. Okay, so that's how we read the molecular evidence. Okay, here's another molecule. This is called cytochrome C. It's found in every mitochondria. So every living organism that has a mitochondria, which is everything on the planet, we can look at that protein. And again, we can see the differences in the amino acid sequence to humans. And again, following that, we see that the comparison, the more closely we related are, like we are more related to a rabbit than we are to a pigeon, because you see there's 9 differences in the amino acid between a human and a rabbit, but and there's 12 between a human and a pigeon. But we're more closely related to a pigeon than we are to a fruit fly, okay? All right, so now we're going to go over some misconceptions. I'm just checking my time here. All right, so misconception number 1, natural selection is the survival of the fittest, and so it leads to the evolution of traits that promote the survival of individuals. That sounds pretty good, right? But yeah, you want to survive, but it's not how long you survive, but it's about how many of your genes do you get into the next generation. So for example, a gorilla, an older gorilla that lives 15 years but never mated, okay, is going to be genetically dead because it doesn't have any of its genes in the next population. the next generation. But a gorilla that lives only 7 years and dies, but mated and had 5 offspring, has genes in the next generation. Okay, natural selection favors individuals with the largest number of offspring. Okay, well, that kind of sounded like we talked about in the previous slide, but again, it's not about how many offspring you have, you birth, how many eggs you lay, because are those eggs actually going to survive to hatch? So it's not unless those offspring survive. Okay, so when we see in birds can control the number of eggs that they have. So if it's a lean year where they're not going to have maybe a lot of food, then it makes sense to not have a lot of offspring during that, not lay a lot of eggs if you can't support them. So some birds control the number of offspring they produce, and they alter the number of eggs to maximize survivorship. So then think about a frog that lays 300 eggs that get fertilized. Okay, yeah, that's 300 eggs. That's 300 little tadpoles that made it to the next generation. But how many of those tadpoles are going to make it to frog status? Okay. And now, lastly, why do scientists try to keep religion out of science? Okay. All right. Well, remember that science is based on hypotheses testing. And to be a valid scientific hypothesis, you have to be able to test that hypothesis. Okay. Because science only makes statements about what can be tested, whereas religion is based on faith. It's supposed to be based on faith, right? You're supposed to believe something in religion on blind faith without any evidence. Most devout believers trust in something despite evidence to the contrary. So remember the story of doubting Thomas, okay? So in the Bible, you have Thomas was one of Christ's apostles, and after Christ was crucified and the resurrection, okay, the apostles were like, "Oh my goodness, it's Christ, you have risen," and Thomas was like, "Yeah, I don't believe you." Okay, so Thomas doubted that Christ had risen. And what did he say? He said, "Show me the evidence. Show me your hands. Show me the wounds." Okay? Creation scientists sign a vow saying that despite what they find, they will only interpret it as consistent with the Bible. Okay? Well, this is what I have to say about that you only interpret evidence as to how you want it to come out. Okay? All right. Here we go. So here we have the monkeys, right? And they're like, "Yeah, we want a party."
Just thought you might want to know, sales aren't up, they're down.
Sales are up, not up, they're down. Okay. They don't care. Because they want a party. Okay? I love that commercial.
Want a new job? We've got the most. CareerBuilder.com.
I
A
love
better
that
job.
commercial. Love it. Okay. Love that commercial. Okay. So creation scientists, okay? That's like saying, hey, we're going to look at the data, and if we don't like what the data says, then we're going to throw it out. So we want sales to go up. So basically, we're going to change the data or only look at the data that is consistent with what we want to see. Okay? That's not how science works. Okay? So here, I like this cartoon. It says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. And it says, I don't know, it's kind of blurry. Then a miracle occurs. Okay? All right. So again, science and religion are two different ways of explaining something. Okay? In religion, you're supposed to believe on blind faith. Okay? You're not supposed to question a miracle. You're not supposed to question that. But in science, you're supposed to question everything, and you're supposed to ask for evidence to go along with it. Okay. I like this cartoon too. It says, "Sir, the Floridian Christians are opposing the teaching of evolution in their public schools." And this is supposed to be God opposing it. Why would they do that? Because I invented it. All right. When scientists are forced to defend the theory of evolution from those who find supernatural creation more credible, Again, in science, we test the predictions of each theory based upon the available data. And in every situation, okay, looking at the data that's at hand, the fossil record, comparative anatomy, biochemical evidence, okay, all of that, it supports the scientific theory of evolution by natural selection, not the literal interpretation of the Bible. So a creationist asserts one must assume that the Bible is literally correct and then interpret the scientific data. And in science, we don't do that at all, okay? You're supposed to set all your assumptions aside and look at the evidence objectively. While most scientists try to keep science and religion as separate realms, there are some scientists who believe that evolution is God's way of creating life on Earth. So that's another reason why I kind of like that cartoon, because, it's like, wait, why are you opposing evolution? I created it, okay? And just the last thing about evolution, okay? So in 1996, the current Pope at the time came out with a statement. Here you can see Pope John Paul has lent his support to the theory of evolution, proclaiming it as compatible with Christian faith, okay? Vatican thinks of Vatican thinking of evolves, okay? So the Pope gives his blessing to natural selection, though man's soul remains beyond science's reach. And you can see that again in here. There is no conflict between evolution and the doctrine of the faith regarding man and his vocation, provided that we do not lose sight of certain fixed points, okay? There are materialistic and reductionist theories, as well as spiritualistic theories. Here the final judgment is within the competence of philosophy and beyond that of theology, okay? This leads us towards the recognition of evolution as more than a hypothesis, okay? Basically, I just like to put that in there because this is a free country, and you can, believe what you want to believe. And in the scientific community, the best explanation for how species have evolved is the theory of natural selection by evolution. And if you were to go to a parochial university like BYU or Notre Dame, okay, those are Catholic college, and BYU is LDS. You can take classes in Darwinian's theory of evolution, and you can get a degree. They have evolution programs there, even though they are religious institutions. So again, I leave this end this PowerPoint, this lecture here, and I hope that you guys keep an open mind. Thank you.